Today is Wednesday, November the 9th, 2011. I'm Matthew T.G.
I'm Steve Stanley.
I'm Heath Mullican.
And I'm Tony Casey. Welcome to the Technology Show, a weekly podcast featuring technology, theology, and everything in between. The world's only user-antagonistic podcast. This is episode 131. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Tony, you kind of sound like you're in an aquarium today. What's
I don't
going
think
on?
he has his tea this morning.
Yeah.
He's up there at Table Rock doing teaching for flame classes, right?
Okay, so I'm under the witness protection program now, and this will be the last day I'm Tony Casey, and so now I'm up at Table Rock teaching flame. And actually have the whole campus down on internet. I'm hogging all the bandwidth just so we can bring you the Technology Show today. All right?
So you're all the way up at 512K, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is awesome speed. All right, listen, let's jump right in. We have a guest who's joined us today. We are just thrilled to have Donna Whitten with us. She works at 12 Stone Church. It's in the Metro Atlanta area, and we've brought her on the show to talk about her book, Pocket Full of Questions. This is a children's book, but as Matthew has reminded me, it's also a parent's book as well. Donna, we welcome you to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Listen, before we jump into the book, let's do it this way. Why don't you start by telling us your journey to 12 Stone?
Oh, that was a great journey. I actually came to 12 Stone when it was Crossroads the very first week, November 1st, 1987. So I've been here for 24 years now. Kind of walked in as a single mom with a 3-year-old and was trying to reconnect to my faith. I had been raised in the church and walked into our first service in a movie theater and knew that I had found my home church. It was great.
Wow.
That's cool. You came to the very first service. How did you even know about 12 Stone?
A friend of mine had gotten the mailer that went out that just said, hey, we're having this grand opening at this movie theater, and her husband wouldn't go with her, and she asked if I would go with her. So we journeyed off on that morning, and it was small, a lot of room in a movie theater with only maybe 50 people there.
Wow.
But you just knew that God was already starting to work there.
Give our listeners some perspective. You say that first morning there were 50. Tell our listeners, those that don't know about 12 Stone, how big it is.
Right now we're a little over 12,000 on Sunday mornings, and that's over 4 campuses. So, yeah, we've grown just a little.
That's fantastic.
Now you have small groups that are bigger than 50, don't you? Now, you're a pastor of communications and redemptive arts. Tell us a little bit about that.
Strange mix, I know. And we actually do have a pastor of worship arts who is primarily responsible for all of our Sunday morning programming, but I'm still a part of the redemptive arts team and work on some programming for Sunday, do some creative processing, and lead some teams that help form the elements that we do on our Sunday morning services. That's about 20% of what I do now. When I came on staff, it was 100% of what I did, but in the past 2 years, they asked me to come over here and be director of communications. So for the past 2 years, I've been playing in that pool of social media and internal communications, marketing, public relations, all of those good things.
Hey,
Donna,
real
ahead.
quick, as in your role, what is because a lot of churches are trying to get a handle on all of that. Are there any particular resources that have really helped you in growing into that role and in helping the church communicate with everybody effectively and market effectively?
I tell you, there's one book by a lady named Kim.
Yes, we were hoping you'd say that. We
Less
know
noise,
it.
less clutter.
Yes.
Everybody needs to start with that book. because there's so many things out there that are clamoring for people's attention, and there's so many things that in technology especially that you can benefit from. It's hard to know sometimes where to start, how much is too much, what you should really be focused on. So I would say that that is a must-have for everybody.
I think the title probably got lost in our rejoicing. Would you mind giving the title and author again, please?
Less noise, less clutter, and it's Kim Meyer.
Okay.
Yeah, she's
Thank
somebody
you.
that I've been talking with Tony about, kind of putting a bug in his ear that maybe we should go down the road of trying to get her on our
that
show
would
at
be-
some point. Yeah, it's just a fantastic book. I think Heath and we both
Yeah.
read that. Yeah.
One of the things that struck me, even when I saw your title, Donna, was the redemptive arts. And we have, just in a very general sense, we have talked here on our show about there was a time in church history where the church really used the arts. It was there front and center in the church, and we are beginning to see a wonderful resurgence in the church reclaiming the arts as worship, as a way of reaching out to the community. And I would imagine that 12 Stone is, that's right at the very heart of some of the stuff that they're doing.
It was one of the things that drew me in the very first service. Back in 1987, we were patterned after the Willow Creek, model. So the very first service, it was, worship. There was a drama along with teaching. So truly from the beginning, the creative arts have been a part of our DNA, redeeming the arts. For a long time, we had, dramas every single week, major productions, and what better way to kind of tell the story than with story, things that
Yeah.
people can relate to. So for us, it really is a part of our DNA, and we've been just blessed to see people come alongside that God has gifted, and it's been able to grow into having songwriters who call 12 Stone home, and filmmakers, and all kinds of creative folks.
That's great. Well, I first, you got on my radar screen because of your children's book, A Pocket Full of Questions. And so, there's a lot. I want you to tell our listeners about the book, but also, what was the passion, the vision behind this? How did it come about?
Well, it really started with me seeing a statistic that I read that said that children ask an average of 125 questions per day. And by the time we're adults, we only ask 6 probing questions a day. So in my mind, I thought, well, what happens to the other 119? So I started to write this poem about a little boy who asked so many questions, he just stuffs them in his pockets until one day he is scolded by a teacher and he stops asking questions. So I kind of started that, got it in the works around the same time that I met a lady named Cindy Young. She had called to 12 Stone asking for the pastor on call, and I happened to be pastor on call that day. And she worked with some 12 Stone people who continually told her that they were praying for her because they knew that she was not a believer. So she called the church to say, I want you to tell them to stop praying for me.
Wow.
And so I said, well, I might tell them to stop telling you that they're praying for you, but I'm not going to tell them to stop praying for you because that got you to call. So after a few calls back and forth, she actually agreed to meet me. And we started a conversation, and she was, about as far from God as you could be. She was involved in Wicca and other destructive lifestyle choices. But she did agree to have coffee with me a few times to just talk about it. And eventually, she felt comfortable enough to start asking questions about faith.
Yeah.
And, when she felt safe enough to ask questions, I saw her before my eyes just come to life. She would start to glow. She got excited. And it really brought me back to the whole idea of the book that I had started, or the poem that I had started. And it just put a face with that, and I realized how important it is for adults to have the freedom to ask questions in their faith, and how many have been shut down. She was a 50-year-old woman and thought that she should have all of the answers and was just afraid to ask. So as her journey progressed, she accepted Christ. We continued to have a mentoring, counseling kind of relationship. And recently, she felt that God called her to be a full-time missionary in Bolivia. So since the book kind of was inspired with her, and she inspired part of the book, I thought how great it would be if I could go ahead and publish this book for everyone's benefit, but then let the proceeds go to support her as a full-time missionary in Bolivia. She starts in 2012 down there working with kids in an orphanage. So we're excited about that.
Wow.
That is fantastic. I understand that 12 Stone actually did a series, a sermon series, kind of leapfrogging, using it as a launch pad.
Well, one of the things that if you can get your congregation comfortable with their own level of knowledge, it helps them begin a journey where they feel like they're not going to be, shunned or made fun of. So the Redemptive Arts team knew that I was moving ahead with this book, and during the summer when we have we do our sermon series, all of our sermons are in series.
Right.
And during the summer, when Pastor Kevin is on his vacation and study break, we have the teaching pastors who actually teach during that time, and we look for some sort of blanket idea for the series. So Pocket Full of Questions was a series title where each pastor could come in and take a question of faith that people have and spend the whole service answering that question for people. So the very first week we showed the animated video, which is available if anybody wants to use it. It is online at pocketfulofquestions.com or on our Vimeo.com site.
Yeah, and we're actually playing the video right now for them to see. So.
Okay, great. So the animated video, we showed that the first week and sold the book and just had a really great response. I mean, it's something that you could really use for a number of topics, but starting with giving adults permission to ask questions, I think is a great place to start.
Donna, let me ask you this question. Matthew, our producer there, he kind of added some questions here later on, and one of them is a really great question. Do you think sometimes within the church that we're guilty of squelching questions?
I don't know that it's I don't think it's squelching questions. I think that we assume, especially in the Bible Belt, that if people come to church that they know more than they do. And so it's just not being in tune, perhaps, with where the majority of the people who are walking through our doors are. And I think we're also too quick sometimes to give answers when it's in wrestling with the questions and walking people through how to answer questions themselves, that they grow and they develop and they have the foundation for their faith. But we want to kind of move it along and give them all of the answers right away and tell them what to think, when we should really just be encouraging them to ask the questions and seek those answers out for themselves.
Yeah. Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're the kind of the senior statesman here on our panel. I mean, you've got...
I'm the old guy, right?
Well, I was trying to be nice.
Well, that's unusual. That's what had me unprepared right there.
My kindness is what threw you, right?
Yeah, right.
You've got close to 30 years in ministry. I mean, to me, it seems like part of what Donna says rings true here in terms of, we probably do assume a lot more than we should. I mean...
Oh, yes. And I think that's not only with children, like she's indicating, it's also with adults, even people who have been in our churches for a long, long time. You know this intuitively, that people hibernate spiritually. They still occupy a place on the pew, but There are seasons of spiritual growth and maturing, and there are other seasons where it seems like we're lying fallow for a bit. And there are things that are happening during that time, but it may not be at the cognitive level. I think that we need to keep ourselves reminded by means of this book and conversations like this and other means that people are in process. Then, too, I think we need to be careful not to create environments in which honest questions, even honest doubt, is discouraged.
Yeah.
If the church isn't a
Absolutely.
place where honesty can prevail, where people can say, this is who I am, this is where I am, this is what I'm thinking, not as a final word. In other words, if somebody comes in and they're agnostic and they want to just spout off their agnosticism and then storm out, that's not mature, helpful, or conducive to conversation. But if they want to have a conversation about it, we ought to be okay with that kind of thing instead of saying, hush, we don't talk like that in public.
Yeah. I would imagine, Donna, that, I mean, part of what you're addressing here is kind of the heart of what Steve just said, honest inquiry and creating an atmosphere where that can happen.
Definitely creating the atmosphere, because if we could have as much too to learn from them, the people who are coming in with the questions as
Right.
far as what misconceptions are out there or where
Right.
people really are, who are walking through our doors. So I think dialogue is a really important word, just being able to ask them questions and let them ask questions is just the beginning of understanding for both of us.
You know,
Do you think sometimes we fear questions because we think that we have to have the answer?
I think we fear questions because we know the answer, but we don't know why we have that answer. I don't think that we have the backup. We just know that we know because we've been told. And what people are looking for is the basis of our belief. So I think we get caught off guard because we don't know how to explain or defend what we believe.
Very good. And so one of my questions as I, got the chance to have this book in my hands, or something that I think about is what do we encourage people to do when they hit that point where they say, wow, I know what I believe, but I don't know why I believe it or how I got to this. Where do we send them? And I ask that as a pastor because, I know, well, you can go talk with your pastor, but I have a feeling that there are a lot of pastors even in many places who believe something but don't know why they believe it, don't know how they got to that level of belief, and wouldn't know how to respond well to an honest question that could be a great opportunity.
Well, even as, an ordained pastor, she asked me questions that I had to say, you know what? I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Right.
It's like I've been a Christian so long, I know that I know it, but I can't tell you why I know it. And it's times like that when I'm very thankful, first of all, that we have access on the internet to a lot of tools that give backgrounds for things and basis. And I would never say to override the information that we can locate on the internet with the power of the Holy Spirit to reveal
good.
truth to us
Good.
and go directly to the scriptures. But going directly to the scriptures and then finding out the supporting stories for that actually show the person how to do that themselves.
Right.
So you
I
go
think-
through the experience and then lead them through it.
I think, too, that there's, if we're talking about basic beliefs, Wesleyan Publishing House has rich resources in that area, as do other Christian publishing concerns. And there are some great apologetics writers out there. Lee Strobel comes to mind and others. But I think, too, that just coming into community and saying, I mentioned here a while ago that I went to the pulpit one Sunday after the death of a young woman for whom I and her parents had been praying. And there appeared at that time, thankfully we saw later that this was not the case, but it appeared at that time that she had died without connecting with God, without repenting and receiving Christ as her Savior. And I said, I know this is his will, and he says if we ask anything according to his will, we know that he hears us. If we know he hears us, we have the petitions we've desired. I said, I'm not okay with God this morning. And this is a struggle for my faith, and you need to pray for me. It's not that I've given up belief in God. I know there's a God. I know he's my Savior. I struggle with understanding him and his ways sometimes. I think in community, this kind of authenticity from pastor and from people can create an environment in which people with real questions in their lives that aren't sure if the church has the answers or not can come in among us. And there will be things. Sometimes you're right. It is a child who ministers to me. I carry in my wallet 2 $1 bills. When I was pastoring a neighboring church, there was a boy whose mother was poor, single mother, and he got $0.25 a week. That was his allowance. And I used to give him and other kids in the church the change out of my pockets, mainly because my wife will fuss at me if I go up front. She says I rattle the change while I'm preaching. So I would give it to them, and he came one Sunday bounding up the steps waving $1. Now remember, that's 4 weeks of his allowance. And I looked at it, made a big deal out of it. I said, Nicholas, my goodness, you got a whole dollar. He said, it's for you, preacher. I love you. And I was just a bucket of tears.
Wow.
I carry those. It's been 7 or 8 years. You see right there? They're folded up. Do you see that? Is that too close?
Yeah, get a little closer
Okay.
so we can see that number on that credit card. Good. Okay. Now.
Those he gave me another $1 later on, and I tried to give it back to his mother. She said, you will not do that. He's been saving to give it to. I carry those because those things minister to me out of the community of the saints.
Yeah.
You know.
Donna, one of the things that I love about this book is it is an interactive book. Is this book not only encourages kids to ask questions, but in the back it's actually got a jean pocket. It's got some blank yellow strips, and where kids can write a question, and it tells them, write your question, put it in the little pocket, put this book on your dresser for the parent. And I love that aspect. That's not just a book and they're going to read it, but there's an activity to help parents and kids connect. My question is, with that, are there any stories that you've heard from parents or from kids, but parents saying, man, this is my kid put this book on the dresser and this is what he asked me? Have you heard any stories like that?
I have heard one story from a parent who said that their child had actually put in the back of the pocket, "Mommy, can you talk to me about being baptized?"
Wow.
Which was awesome. The kids don't feel comfortable coming out and saying it, but in this format, it just allows the parent to know what the child is thinking and to bring it up in the best way possible. And also that, parents have questions for kids sometimes that
Right.
feel uncomfortable, like, are you being bullied at school, or is there anything that I can help you with? And they would feel more comfortable filling out a little piece of paper and putting it in the pocket and sending it back to the kid as well. But it's all about creating, dialogue in this kind of environment of permission.
I'm curious, what was, so tell us a little bit about was it a 4-week sermon series, and how was that received?
It was a 4-week sermon series, and it was received really well. We actually sold the book at all of our campuses during this time and had a great response to that. Any of the resources from that particular series are available. So you can go to 12stone.com or contact me, and we'll be more than happy to give you everything that we did, basically during that series, as much as you need, as much as you want. It's kind of funny because the first day when we sold the books, I was a little afraid that teachers would be angry at me because it's a teacher that actually shuts TJ down and is questioning.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And one of the very first books that I sold, the lady was just crying, and she said, "You don't understand. I'm a teacher, and our principal just told us that this year we had to find a way to encourage kids to ask questions."
Wow.
Wow.
And what a blessing it was. And so it's actually taking off really big in in the school system. The book is in several local schools around the area, and I'll be at an educators conference, because one of the things that has made teachers actually go into teaching is they say, I'm not that teacher, but I knew that teacher, and I didn't want to be that teacher. So we're excited about that.
That's awesome.
Very good. Well, I mean, you talk about this being available. Where can our listeners go to find it?
We're on Amazon, and but I will tell you that since the proceeds go to Cindy and her mission efforts in Bolivia, if you go to pocketfulofquestions.com, more of the proceeds will go directly to her as opposed to Amazon. So I'll just give you that little heads up if you go to order that way. And also, if if anybody wants to order and just let us know that they saw us on this show, we will do free shipping for you guys.
What?
Oh, thank you.
This is our first deal we've ever swung here, and we didn't even have to work for it. What?
Hey, listen, also, we do have one copy in studio we bought to give away. And so at the end of the show today, Matthew will tell you, our listeners, how they might be able to get that and enter the giveaway. Donna, there it is. Yeah, Matthew's got the book right there. Donna, what a privilege. It has been so great having you on the show today. We know you have a busy schedule, and so thank you so much for taking time out to be with us.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys are right. I've enjoyed it. So
all right, maybe we'll do a whole episode where we just do sarcasm, and you can answer questions like auto repair.
Oh, don't tempt me. I'm there.
Love it.
The new car talk.
Blessings on you, Donna. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, and I'm going to say to our listeners, I'm going to leave this show in the capable hands.
Yeah.
Maybe I should change that. I'm gonna leave it in the hands of Steve Stanley, Heath Mullock, and Matthew TJ. Hey, listen, I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye, Tony.
Have a good day at Flame.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, just for people who may be listening or watching this, and you're like, what in the world is Flame? Flame is a Wesleyan education program where people who work full-time or aren't able to go to college full-time, they can go for a few days at a time. There's places all over the country, and basically take classes that will count toward their ordination requirements. And so that's what Tony's teaching. I think he said Introduction to Theology. When he was on the phone with me, I had no idea what he said, but then I figured, it has to be Intro to Theology, because there's no other Christian word that rhymes with theology.
Well, it was either that or, stuffing and mounting animals on the wall.
Yes.
What do they call that? The word just left.
Taxidermy?
Taxidermy. There it is. Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. You're welcome.
But how
I
is
need
that
to
going
carry
to
you.
help you in the church? I mean,
Moving right along.
Oh, boys, careful.
He hasn't been gone 30 seconds, and it's already.
we don't put plaques on the wall. So, all right, here we go with the download of the week.
Oh, yeah. All right. Here it comes.
Download of the week.
All right, so Tony asked me, he said, can you get together something this week? And I got to thinking, what is something that, I use so often that I can't live without it? And there are a few things, but one of those things that you can download for free is a quick launcher called Quicksilver, or there's an alternative called Alfred. Both of those are Macintosh programs, but for those of you that are Windows and Linux viewers, I did the hard work of coming up with some alternatives for you. Quicksilver, basically, it is a shortcut that you'd hit on your computer. So for me, it's Command /, which fires up this little window from which you can launch programs. But then that is just the beginning of what it does. There's a whole series of plugins that goes along with Quicksilver to where you can send email directly from it. You can control music players. A lot of cool things that can happen with it. In fact, one thing that Quicksilver does that I have found and I can't live without now is it will keep a backup, guys, of your clipboard. So the other day I copied something and I went to paste it, but I'd closed the window that I'd copied from.
Right.
And before I pasted it, I hit Command C and copied something else.
Right.
And I freaked out saying, I just lost that thing. And I realized, there's an extension that you can put into Quicksilver that will keep, and you can tell it how many, how many backups to keep, seven copy spaces, stuff like that. So it's really cool for that. It's got even more functionality than I've ever imagined. It was run by a guy who now works for Google. He had to give up development of it when he went to Google. He just didn't have time to continue it, but he open sourced the code, and another group has now put it together. So it was running a little bit behind. It wasn't working quite right in Leopard, but this group has, got it back together, and qsapp.com is where you can download that. Alfred is like a more simplified, if you're looking for something just a little bit easier. I feel like it's too complicated to get into Quicksilver, you could start with Alfred. That's an app for that. But then on the Windows side, the only real alternative that I could find was something called Launchy. And Launchy is, Tony said that he's tried it. He said it is not that great at all. Sadly, it suffers. And then if you use Linux, there's a launcher called GnomeDo, which is very similar to Quicksilver. So those are two alternatives. We'll have all the links for you in our show notes. But before we leave this topic, one of the great ways that I've found, if you know of a program that exists on another platform or even on the platform that you're using, but say you say it's a pay-for program like Photoshop, okay, and say, okay, I'd love to have something like Photoshop on my computer, but it costs a lot of money. What are the alternatives? Other programs that are like Photoshop, but maybe cheaper or even free. There is a cool website called alternative2.net. Somebody's changed it in my show notes, so now it says Alternative2.net.
Oh,
but
I did.
But Alternative2.net is a website where you can go and you can put in the name of the program that you're looking for, and it will show you alternatives to that. But then the other cool thing is that it lets you rate things. So like say that for example that, all right, I was using Alfred, but I wanted an alternative, and I went and I searched, and I found Quicksilver as an alternative. And let's say that Heath had been using Quicksilver, and he said, man, this is a fantastic program. He can vote for that program. And so it ranks them according to the number of likes that program has gotten. So what you'll find is that the good programs will come up to the surface, while the not so good or not so very well developed programs sink down to the bottom. So it's absolutely fantastic. So I'm sure if you went and you searched for Photoshop, you'd come up with something like GIMP, and it would probably be, it's a free open source image editing program that would probably be towards the top. And there's Paint.net, that would be another one that would be up towards the top. But then other little ones that might be kind of dinky and not really what we would want it to be, they'll start sinking down to the bottom. So definitely just kind of bookmark that website. That'll be a huge help for you if you're looking for a program that's either free or has the same features or maybe less expensive than one that you're considering. It's a great way to go.
Before you move on, just as a personal point of privilege, my grandson Nate is watching us for the first time in Florida. Nate Mulhall, world's most handsome grandson, by the way, and his mother Joni. And I just want to give a shout out to him. I love you, man, and I love you, Joni.
Great. Hey, the best thing about the Alfred app is he always keeps the Batmobile full of gas.
He does.
So that's always very handy.
And why is it that Windows is not so great? Is this
because I think what it is it has to do with the framework upon which the operating system is built on. So stuff like Linux and OS X, they have so many ways for developers to actually plug into all aspects of the OS using, and I'm not sure that this is technically right, but using stuff like what's it called? There's like OpenGL is for graphics and just different API strings that they give developers to where developers can just really like sink their claws into, and that sounds awful, that's a bad way to put it, but really get in there deep and integrate deeply with the OS. Windows has a hard time with this, so they've tried to do it themselves. They've made the start menu in Windows 7 and a little bit in Vista, but it really started coming around in Windows 7, kind of like a quick launcher, where the start menu, the first thing that is an area, there's an area for you to type, and you can look for programs or documents and stuff like that. But you can only do it in the start menu. How does a third-party developer get those API strings to be able to do that deep integration with the OS and the file system and all of that? And so my guess is that is why programs like this haven't been developed as fully for Windows as they have for OS 10.
I
and
love
Linux, stuff like that.
Ubuntu 11.10. It has all the features you're talking about there, and really incredible, very sturdy system. If I had all my software that was capable of being ported over to Ubuntu, I would use Ubuntu and not Windows.
Well, alternative too. Look at your software, the software that you want to find an alternative in Linux. You can actually narrow it down via operating system and say, only show me Linux applications that are like this Windows application, and it'll give you. And I realize it's not going to be a one-for-one thing, but it'll help you in that regards. And then if you want a quick launcher that has a lot of deep integration, GNOME for Linux is.
Well, mainly the things that I'd be interested in right now are like Logos Bible software, that's a high-end academic package, and I think they've got apps for Linux machines, but I don't think it's the same power and capability. And also things like Encyclopedia Britannica and other Oxford Unabridged English Dictionary. I have those on.
That's actually Oxford English Unabridged Dictionary is actually built into OS 10 from the beginning. When you buy a computer, the whole dictionary is there, and it's so integrated with stuff that you can right-click anywhere.
You're talking
in
about
OS
for
10.
Mac.
Yeah. Anywhere in OS 10, you can right-click and say, look up in the dictionary or define this. There's even a shortcut. I think it's like Command-Shift-D or something like that. You highlight a word.
Everything
and
you're looking for.
The sirens are singing, and I'm being drawn.
I'm telling you. All right, you ready to move on to?
Yeah, let's go to They Said It.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again.
I've never taken steroids or HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
Well, I'm not a crook. If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
But in this case, God could have presented that tsunami and the destruction, but he didn't. He just took his hand off and allowed those natural forces to work. And one of the background pieces of information is Japan is under control of the sun goddess. C. Peter Wagner, former professor at Fuller Seminary, explaining why Japan experienced a tsunami. Source NPR.
According to the New York Times, Penn State is preparing for the exit of longtime football coach Joe Paterno in the wake of the sexual abuse scandal involving former assistant coach Jerry Sandusky. Chris Greenberg, reporting for the Huffington Post, source AOL News.
It is abundantly clear from viewing these images that the emotional response they were crafted to induce is calculated to provoke the viewer to quit or never to start smoking, an objective wholly apart from disseminating purely factual and uncontroversial information. U.S. District Judge Richard Leon, in a 29-pages ruling blocking a federal requirement that would have begun forcing tobacco companies next year to put graphic images including dead and diseased smokers on their cigarette packages. Source Associated Press.
Fannie Mae is working to reduce losses on our legacy book and limit taxpayer exposure. That was Susan McFarland, the company's executive vice president and chief financial officer, who said this after tapping the Fed for $7.8 billion more to cover losses.
All right, let's start with this quote about the tsunami. If you remember when the major earthquake hit Haiti several years ago, Pat Robertson came forward and said, "Oh, this is God's judgment because Haiti's under control of the devil." There's really not a lot of difference in these two quotes. Steve, what do you think about Wagner's quote here?
Well, the good side of this is we know where their heart is. Yes. They're trying to defend God in the face of evil, and I think that's a wonderful intention that every Christian ought to share. Unfortunately, they end up doing him greater harm than if they had just kept quiet, because some of these explanations we come up with, and this is called Theodicy, trying to defend God's justice in the face of prevailing evil. Some of our explanations are so vapid, so empty of intellectual content that they actually make God look like he's a simpleton and make the Christian faith look nonsensical. What would have been a good response for him here?
Well, here's my question that takes us down a little bit of a different road. Does God still pour out his judgment in things like this and I'm going to frighteningly use this term, in an Old Testament way, or was that judgment on mankind poured out on Christ? Like, does God still use events like this to do that, or since because of Christ, was that wrath poured out on him, and these kind of events are in no way, shape, or form God's wrath on people, but rather a natural event that then we need to figure out a new way as a church to respond and not keep saying these dumb things like it's the sun goddess or it's the pact with the devil or whatever. Well, I just blew your mind there, Heath, didn't I?
Right. That was great.
It is a great question, and it's one that if you had a room full of philosophers and theologians, you could occupy them for weeks. But I think it's probably bigger than where we are now. If he doesn't do it now, let me say my position would be that he will do it again because he's promised that's the way the world ends.
Right.
However, I would argue that there are occasions when he has done it. I can think of times when he did it. He's done it. He's intervened in human history even in the past century or two. According to all the documentation we have, one such event was the miracle of Salerno during the Second World War, which I'll not describe now. It would take too long to set the stage for it. But there's no other explanation based on what the Nazi records say they saw, and the Allies know that they didn't have anything like that in the area, and how God must have intervened. But I will say this, that C. Peter Wagner is assuming something. This is an arrogant statement, in my opinion. He is assuming to know connections that are not in view, unless God has directly spoken, unless he were to be able to say authentically, I have a word from the Lord, and this tsunami was because of this.
Right.
If he's willing to go on record like that,
Right.
I still don't have to believe it.
Right.
I have to try that allegation or that statement,
Right.
that assertion.
But if he did that,
yeah.
doesn't that put him in the same vein as Harold Camping,
Well,
who said, I have had a word from the Lord, and this is the date, and oops.
but wait a minute. We don't know if God spoke to him. I mean, you put yourself around Jonah 40 days, and this was Jonah's whole complaint.
Right.
And then God doesn't destroy Nineveh in 40 days. That was a pretty specific prophecy, right? And so Jonah gets all bent out of shape because he says, I knew you were like this. I knew the minute I announced it, and if they had any wiggle room and began to repent and turn to you, that you were going to be merciful. And so we can't know that. But I'm saying if that were really his position, if he were convinced that God had spoken to him, then he can say that, and we don't have to accept it. People can still think it's crazy. But this is an arrogant statement because it doesn't say, now God has revealed to me, whether that revelation was an onion sandwich or whether it was a real revelation from God. Doesn't make that claim.
Right.
He claims to know enough about the nature of God that he can draw lines between this event and God's justice. And my point is that's not the case. Yeah. Job had done nothing wrong. God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. God so loved the world. Taken in context, what we know is this event is one symptom of a fallen world that God wants us to work with him in redeeming.
Absolutely.
And somebody has said, well, earthquakes are important. They're necessary for the conducting of the world. And I have two responses. First of all, the fallenness of the world is the only way we know this world, so we can't know what a world without fallenness would require. The second response is, even if that were the case, perhaps in a non-fallen world we would be warned, or these earthquakes would happen in certain zones where everybody was, knowing in advance that they weren't going to have to be there. But my point here is, he claims too much knowledge.
I want to just for a second go back, because I do see a difference between your example that you gave about the Allied forces and Hitler and all of that and God's intervention. I see a difference between that and the grand picture that, like Pat Robertson and this gentleman is making about God's over a whole group of people. Because what you described there was an event, right? Like a one, and not across the entire nation of Germany, not across the entire army that they may have had spread out all across Europe, but like an event, a God interacting. And I believe that God does that.
Well, it would be tantamount to drowning the Egyptian army in the Red Sea.
But that wasn't God's judgment on the Egyptian people. Yeah,
Was it?
No. This is God. This is God's redemption of His people, not God's judgment on the Egyptian people.
It's the only way. It's the only way. My point is the only way He could redeem His people in that situation. What appears to be redemption and rescue on the part of the Israelite would certainly, from an Egyptian charioteer, seem like judgment and damnation.
Right. Yeah. And I should be clarifying this as it's being pointed out to me in the chat room. This is my estimation of these things. But I really do hold the belief that statements like the one that we're talking about today, that we can't align ourselves with those, because God's overall judgment on people and sin was poured out on Christ. And yes, the time's going to come when that era is going to change with the return of Christ. We do know that. But we are still, from everything that we know or believe, we're still in this era that is covered by the blood of Christ and His suffering and God's wrath on us for our sins being poured out on Him. God's wrath for sins, there may be isolated events, where God does step in and interact, but the overall judgment of people, I mean, my estimation on what I know and have seen is that happened with Christ.
Well, speaking of wrath and judgment, let's talk about this Penn State story. If you haven't been keeping up with it, former assistant coach at Penn State, Jerry Sandusky, who was really one of the main people responsible for Penn State becoming known as Linebacker U in the 70s and 80s. And it's come to light that during his time as an assistant coach, that he used that position to abuse, I believe the number is at least 6 to 8 boys. Actually used a charity or a foundation that they had worked through. Now, the big there's no controversy in what Jerry Sandusky, what he did, absolutely wrong if he did it. The controversy is Joe Paterno was informed of this by a graduate assistant who came and said, "Hey, I saw this. I saw something that was wrong." Joe Paterno, by the letter of the rules and the letter of the law and the letter of the Penn State Code of Ethics, did what he was supposed to. He reported it to his superiors. However, a lot of the call for Joe Paterno to step down as head coach is people saying he could have done more. He did report to his superiors, but there's a story out this morning that Sandusky was even on campus last week. No, that's not confirmed, but that's a story that's out. And so you hear this, you report it, but you still allow this person who's under suspicion to participate, to coach.
There's definitely blood on the hands in a situation like
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm just trying to put myself in that situation. If a charge were to be made against you, for instance, and I wouldn't put you in charge of children's church or anything like that, but what we're talking about here on the program, I would assume that the authorities who have been notified are working on this, and if they haven't made an arrest or haven't come back to me and said, "Hey, there's enough stinking here that you need to take," I would trust those who have that responsibility to give me the feedback, since I have approached them as I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And I don't know. I don't know all the details of this story. You know that I'm not up on sports, but I'm assuming. Here's what I hate. I saw last night on television. One of the few shots had been taken since this story broke, and he wasn't speaking to people. But I saw a man who's going to be dead soon, I think. because he's lived his whole life honorably and a good coach by all accounts.
Right.
He did what he knew to do. He's what, 80-some? 84 years of age. And he did what he knew to do and trusted that what needed to be done would be done. And now this one thing, in which by all accounts he's done what he was supposed to have done.
Right.
Maybe not to the satisfaction of some, but as you could clearly make an argument it was as best he understood it should be done. Because you don't want to expose Penn State to a lawsuit from Sandusky if you fire him or put him on restriction without.
Right.
Yeah. But how many times and for how many years, and working in the coaching program, but what about the foundation? Like, do you allow him to continue to?
Right. Well, here's what I think part of this is coming from is Joe Paterno is 84 years old. I mean, for more than a decade, I would say for the past 15 years, there have been calls, Paterno's too old, he needs to step down, he needs to move on, and he is not. He still enjoys coaching.
Vigorous man.
And I feel like a lot of this is 15 years of pent-up frustration in that he hasn't stepped down, that he hasn't moved on. And so a lot of people are using this opportunity to jump on him and say, well, he needs to be gone. Personally, I'm of the opinion at some point with a football program, the buck stops here. And in my opinion, at Penn State, the buck stops with Joe Paterno. I mean, you can say athletic, and I agree. Joe Paterno did everything he could, but I believe that he did have a responsibility to follow up, to follow through, and if somebody made an accusation against one of my assistant pastors, do I just go to the DS and say, well, hey, buddy, I heard this?
No, but ministry is different,
Well,
and also the relationship that they have to children is different. This guy had no need to be in constant contact with children.
That's absolutely
So we don't know. The facts are not in view. Did Joe say anything to him like, hey, stay away from the kids? We don't know any of that yet. Right now, all we've got, and my strong sense of justice is to see an old man who has done well in his life now end his career under a cloud simply because there is a potential skunk. I mean, that guy is still presumed innocent until guilty.
Yeah.
But to see him end his career under a cloud because of this, when he did, what was demanded of him?
And that's the saddest part is this guy. I don't think Penn State's ever been investigated under Joe Paterno. He's run one of the cleanest programs in a tough conference. He's been successful, national championships, all-time winningest coach. But this scandal will sadly be what he's run.
Make no mistake about it. If it was my 10-year-old son, I'd do my own investigation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it'd be conducted in about 15 minutes. And summary execution. So I just don't know.
So let's move on to cigarettes.
Yes.
No, thanks. I've already had it.
What do you think about this ruling? They were going to require tobacco companies to put graphic images on cigarette packs. My wife, Karen, maybe 10 years ago or so, was actually a preventionist for Anderson and Oconee County. She traveled to all the district schools talking about alcohol and tobacco and drug prevention. And she had this poster of people who had used tobacco. And it was just a poster they had mouth cancer. And every day I would pull into my driveway, and it's sticking in her back window. So that's the first thing I saw when I got home, and it's disturbing. I mean, she had all the tools. She had this big old inflatable cigarette with all the chemicals. Let me tell you, there is an abundance of educational materials. I mean, there's a big warning on the package. I think you could put these pictures on there, and if people are going to smoke, they're going to smoke. And I don't know, it might deter a young person. But Every single person who's lighting up right now as I speak, everybody in the chat room, they know.
They're lighting up in the chat room.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's tobacco we're talking about.
I got to say, I agree with the district judge's statement that the pictures were, I mean, they were done to draw an emotional response, a calculated
I'm
emotional
proud of you.
response.
You're a libertarian under the skin.
No,
aren't you?
I am. Like, I totally agree. I get where that guy's coming from, and I agree that there is what drives me nuts is the tobacco company itself. And should they have to say, well, we'll sell you cigarettes, but they also have to throw money and funding into anti-smoking advertisements? It's talking out of both sides of your mouth. Well, and why can't we take one side of the fence or the other?
That's right. Make it illegal if it's that bad a product.
Make it illegal, or say it doesn't have to be illegal, but it's dangerous or whatever. I don't know.
Right. I don't think it's the government's role to do this. I think I remember when I pastored a Congregational Christian church outside of Muncie, Indiana, we had for our teens once 3 or 4 movies that were entertainment, and then one called, I believe, The Feminine Mistake, and it was about a woman who had been a smoker. She was in her early 30s, and she's dying now of lung cancer. You see her as a vigorous athlete. You see her in all these other functions of life, and now dying of lung cancer. And it just cuts to that wasted image. You don't know. You don't suspect where you're headed until it's too late in the movie. And then she's pleading with them, please don't smoke. And look what's happened to me. And her children are there, and they're weeping, and she's not going to be able to see them get married or graduate high school and all these other things. So it was heart-wringing. I think that's a parent and a church's responsibility. I don't think it's the government. The government should say that's legal or not legal. And if they're going to make it legal, then they shouldn't be able to stop free speech about it.
So here's, and I agree with what you're saying. This is great. But here's the $1 million question.
Okay.
Should it be legal or illegal?
I only got 50 cents.
Yeah. No, I mean, what do you think? So, like, we regulate marijuana usage. There's a big push to legalize
you're gonna get me out there where I'll get my credentials torn out.
Yeah, I know. But what should it be? Should it be legal or illegal?
And that'll be taken up in our next show.
Well, here's the thing. We got you've got the government debating whether or not to step in on the cigarette issue, and then, if I'm not mistaken, you've got Fannie Mae, which is a government-run entity, giving out. All right, I want to make sure I get this straight. So correct me if I'm wrong. You have Fannie Mae, government-run entity, giving out loans directed by the government, who to give loans to.
Mandating it.
Mandating it. In doing that, gives loans to people who are unable. Even before the papers are signed, these people are going to be unable to pay this loan. They give the loans anyway because they've been mandated by the government. They have to. And now Fannie and Freddie, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I don't know what the difference between those two is. And now they've used taxpayer money to fund these loans. And now $7.8 billion to cover their losses.
Yeah. I want to recommend a book to people. It's not by Christian authors so far as I'm aware. In fact, I think they're politically liberal. But what they're saying in this book, in a way of diagnosing America's malaise is absolutely dead on. It's called That Used to Be Us. I just saw both authors. One of them's Thomas Friedman. He's a New York Times columnist. That Used to Be Us, and they were on Book Notes TV on C-SPAN over the weekend. And they talk about this very thing that you're addressing there, that when the government is unleashed, now these are liberals, who ordinarily would want the government to be on, but when the government dictates market and other considerations, we always end up in a big mess. And they go back and they look at it several different ways. So That Used to Be Us is the name of the book. and Thomas Friedman, and what's the other guy's name? Are you looking it up there?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm actually preparing for our next story,
All right.
our final
All right.
story of the day.
Sometimes people go to great lengths to cover their losses. This man decided to rob a bank with a very unusual weapon. Let's take a
Yes,
look
I
at
have
this
a picture.
video.
It's not a video. It's actually a picture.
Picture.
There it is, right there. Can
He
you
went
see what he's
in
doing?
with bug spray.
Well, making a pest of himself.
What do you? I mean, I don't. Is bug spray like? I know it's
toxic.
harmful in heavy doses. I know.
It depends on
Well,
what
hey,
kind
when
it
you're
is.
when you're Bank of America and you're run by a bunch of slimy bugs, anyways, like this was the best.
We disavow
way.
any of that from this.
Yes!
From this.
Wasn't that
I'm
beautiful?
telling ya.
Weren't you happy
We get
about
the
that?
show
I tell
sued
you
by
what,
Bank of America.
I worked hard to put that line together,
That's
guys.
funny.
That was for you.
So,
Oh, man.
I didn't. Did he? Was he caught? Like, did they? Was this a successful bank robbery? I mean, the man's not at
Let's see
large,
here.
is
Let's
he?
see. Toting white plastic container, blah, blah, blah. The crook fled. Undisclosed sum of money. No one was injured. Witnesses described
No
the
one was
man.
injured.
Anyone with information
flies were.
about the case.
Several tellers were found on their backs with their
Right, their legs up in the air, twitching but unable to roll over. Yeah.
You know, couldn't they just follow the trail of dead bugs to use like to find him? It's like,
We're too bad on this
That's
one,
great.
I'm going to tell you.
All right, guys, that was fantastic. What do you say? I actually have. I played a bit of it while Donna was speaking, but I have the video. What do you say to end the show after we do our thing? We just let that play us out, her video that goes along with her book.
Yeah,
But
that'd
first,
be
let
great.
me let everybody know about our
Yes.
giveaway. We do have a copy of Donna Whitten's book, Pocket Full of Questions, that we will give away via our Facebook page. So go to Facebook, tag our show. You got to like the show page first, but then tag our show in a post saying that you'd like to have this copy of this book, and we will get it mailed to you. But also, Donna said that if you'll order this book from them, like if you didn't win, and you mentioned that you heard about it on the Technology Show, that they'll ship it to you for free. So they'll get it to you just for the cost of the book. So be sure to check that out via Pocketful of Sunshine. Pocketful of Sunshine. That's a song. Pocketfulofquestions.com. Let's see. We've got some big-time guests coming up soon. November the 16th next week, Dr. Weitzel is back with us again to talk about his new book. The next week, right before Thanksgiving, Dr. Gorvette from Bethany Bible College is here to speak with us.
and with a huge announcement.
Potentially. We
Yes.
don't know that for sure.
Oh,
but,
I'm gonna say
oh,
it.
yeah.
I'm gonna say it.
He's stepping out on faith.
Yes.
December the 7th, Dr. Lyon with us again. We'll be able to ask her about all the insider details about General Conference and all those kind of good questions that we're
right.
dying to know. Then the 14th of December, Dr. Voss, the new president at Southern Wesleyan University. I think he's going to be in studio.
Yeah, that's what I
here
heard.
with us physically. Great guy. I haven't got to
Absolutely.
talk with him much personally. We know one-on-one. But what I have run into him and seen him speak, I really like Dr. Voss. And then January the 4th, for our first show for the new year, we will be talking with Mark Batterson, whose
What a way to
book
kick
is
off
actually
the
coming
year.
out a month early, right?
It comes out December 6th on Amazon. It's called The Circle Maker.
Right.
It talks about, just praying for different things in your life. And, we had the opportunity to interview Mark about this will almost be exactly
It
a
will,
year.
almost a year ago, right?
So we're just so
But
pleased
this will be a
to
little
have
bit more
him
of a
with us.
long form interview, and we are really just looking forward to that, guys. I guess I'll go through all of this. You guys know where you can find us. We've said it every week. So chaseyourline.com, heathmulligan.com.
That's right. And I actually posted at heathmulligan.com. The guys have been on me, posted on some vision stuff, and
Nice.
so they can check that out.
Steve, people go to facebook.com/Steve Stanley or
Yes, and
Steve.Stanley.
I want to give a quick shout out.
Yeah.
Joni, Faith Mulhall, Nate Mulhall, and Kayla, whom I didn't know was in the room. Kayla Mulhall.
All right.
World's greatest kids.
I tell you.
Grandkids.
You guys, you can find me at MatthewTG.com. You can find Tony up at Table Rock. I believe he's staying in room 703. Go up there at about midnight and just knock on the door.
Just send things to his door, pizzas and
Yeah,
things
oh,
like
yeah.
that. Of course, COD.
Absolutely. If you'd like to hear anything else that we've done on the show, do further research about it. You
Or
can
have a
find
suggestion for a topic.
Yeah, absolutely. But you can find more details about what we talked about today on our show. I'll be putting that up. It usually gets done at about noon. So check that out at thetechnologyshow.com. If you have any suggestions, like Steve said, about topics for us to cover in the future, you can email us at thetechologyshow@gmail.com, or leave us a voicemail by calling 3049-TEOLOGY. That is something that is super cool. There's no one that's going to actually answer. It's just voicemail, but you can leave your message with questions or comments about the show. We would absolutely love to get those because we will use those in the show to talk about what you guys are talking about. Leave us a message. Like I said, we may play it on the air. Thank you for being with us. Thanks to Donna Whitten, an awesome guest. I hope that we can get her back for a little bit more lengthy time. She was fantastic. So that's great. Bye, everybody, here, there, and everywhere. See you later.
Adios.
Sayonara.
Amigos. Let me find our video here of Pocket Full of Questions. Here we go.
There once was a boy who had much to say, in the form of questions, all the time, every day. Thomas Jackson was his name, called TJ for short. His parents reasoned he's just an inquisitive sort, which seemed quite normal, for most young lads ask why we stay on the ground and don't float into the sky, or how ants can carry more weight than their own, and what makes it possible to talk on the phone. But TJ was different, for when an answer was provided, another question popped up. It never subsided. So folks would dodge him, cross the street to get away. He's an irritating boy wonder, you could hear them all say. Still he wondered all day and he pondered all night. He'd been jotting down questions since the day he could write. He would stash them away in the pockets of his clothes until the next day. Then more queries he posed. Then one day came, much different from the rest. His teacher reached her limit, and she squashed his great quest. Your questions are annoying. I've no time to expound. Now sew up your pockets. Be silent. Sit down. Sew up your pockets of questions indeed. Answers for everything you certainly don't need. I'll tell you what to know, how to think, and how to act. And if you can't stop your asking, then just don't come back. Words pierced like arrows. His curiosity was like air. What will happen if he couldn't ask who, what, when, or where? Still he tried his best, but sometimes they'd slip out. So he'd slink back home and get the sewing kit out. By the time Thomas Jackson had grown up to be a man, all his questions were tucked away, sewn up by his own hand, which made it quite difficult when applying for a position, for his lack of inquiry seemed like a lack of ambition. He had not asked how much money he would make, or how many days off he'd get at Christmas break. For when the boss man asked if he had any thoughts, he grasped his pockets tight, just as he'd been taught. It went on like this for almost 6 months. He asked no questions, not even once. Then one day, a special question was asked of him by a striking new employee. Her name was Kim. Hello, Thomas Jackson. How do you do? Fine, he stammered. I don't mean to be rude. Still, he ran straight away, and his words were so few, she wondered why he hadn't asked how she was, too. It wasn't that he was shy or had no inclination. Truth is, he was smitten, but withheld interrogation. So it seemed he was doomed to love her from afar, when another guy asked her, "Want to ride in my car?" As he watched his true love walk away. This silence, he declared, ends today. He ran home that instant and started tearing things apart. There must be one somewhere. It's a matter of the heart. He went through his shirts and pockets and pants. He ripped all of them open, hoping for just one chance. But the places for his ponderings were empty and bare. See, unasked questions disintegrate if left too long there. Defeated and searching, he sat down on the floor with a tear in his eye. He prayed for one more. But he had lost all his questions, 1,140,625 to be exact, and he would have given anything to have just one back. And just when he thought that his love was lost too, something caught his eye from a small pocket in his shoe. He opened it quickly as his heart beat faster. Indeed, this question was the query to ask her. So first thing in the morning, he rushed in to see Kim. Somehow he seemed different, a more confident him. Good morning, dear Kim. You're quite a lovely sight, and I was just wondering, want to have dinner tonight? The more questions he asked, more questions appeared. This first date of many, he talked off her ear, but she loved every minute as he asked whats and whys. He talked all night long as she gazed in his eyes. Not long after that, another question was posed. You guessed it right. Thomas Jackson proposed, and when he asked Kim if she'd be his fair wife, she answered, "Most surely, for the rest of my life." 6 years later, we peeked in to see a new little cutie made their family of 3. And while there weren't answers for all of her whys, she could ask all she wanted about the French and their fries, how dirt got dirty, why bees have to buzz, why God made broccoli, and when peaches grew fuzz, what makes orange a color and also a fruit, and how come astronauts have bubblehead suits, and you get the picture. So what can we learn from our friend TJ's quest? Pockets full of questions are certainly best. So ask all you want, even if others do chide. For a life full of curiosity is a wonderful ride.